They're looking at like, how can we have our Marvel moment within Star Wars? But instead of having it in the movies, we're having it in the TV shows. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And hey, this is a clip from the full episode, which you can check out in the description or on the channel. Now, back to the clip. So I think Mandalorian Season 3, among all of its different revelations, we really got to look at how Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are expecting things to connect throughout the Star Wars universe. We're seeing a lot more of like Rebels and Clone Wars stuff, as well as things from Mandalorian. What's really showing is where they want to go and what their expectations are when it comes to this. And I think they're going for, I mean, they all but say this, they're looking at like, how can we have our Marvel moment within Star Wars? But instead of having it in the movies, we're having it in the TV shows.
I would say that's a better way to do it. And it really does feel like it will conclude. Like, this is just a moment in Star Wars time that we're just having fun, mixing all the pot together. We're doing this big old jambalaya or something that we're just throwing everything into this pot, but it will come to an end with the movie.
Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, they both have an idea of where they want to go. And Dave Filoni knows that the movie that he's going to be working on is like the ultimate mix of all of these efforts. And they say this in this interview. This comes from Star Wars Newsnet, which they kind of did a summary of it from the Entertainment Weekly interview and really brought some of the big highlights up into it. Talking with Entertainment Weekly, Filoni revealed that he and Favreau are still in the process of figuring out how their library of characters are going to intersect, though they've had plans for a big event like this for some time. Quote, "We're in the right area code. We are definitely in the right space. I think it's going to be a clamoring of characters saying, how do I get in this picture?" That's what John and I have been figuring out.
Interesting.
And I think that's where Star Wars and Marvel really differ. In Marvel, they know exactly where they're heading and what needs to happen on the way to that. And that is definitely a way to write things. But I feel like that's also some of the holdbacks when it comes to Marvel stuff. Like, they do really limit themselves in terms of like how far they can go in one direction or the other. It's very much, we need to do this because we need to have this character, and this character needs to go here, and this character needs to go here. And these things need to happen, so these characters need to go here. Like, that's kind of how they do it with Marvel. Well, George Lucas had somewhat of a plan of where he wanted to go. He didn't know that Luke Skywalker and Leia were going to be that big of like siblings or that big of a focus in the story. At least that's how we see from what he wrote. But I was watching an interview with George Lucas recently, and he was talking about how when he was writing the original trilogy, obviously he had like inklings of the story from the prequels in his brain, but he was like, I didn't know those characters or like where they went. Like, I knew some of the steps that they took to get them to where they were in the original trilogy, but obviously until I sat down and started writing it, that's where it really came to flesh out.
We're pretty much seeing the same history of Star Wars all over again. It's great.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
I think that's what makes Star Wars so unique. They get to play around with a lot of different takes. It's like, okay, let's make a big collaborative piece over here where we have many different styles in this own little art piece. It's all part of the same canvas, but it's very much each person has a take on what Star Wars is to them.
Getting back to the Mandoverse, it is that collaboration of like a whole bunch of different takes and people and all of that.
Someone's going to lean more into the samurai aspect, or someone's going to lean more into the sci-fi aspect, and someone's going to really lean more into the Western aspect. All these different bits and pieces are going to have different flavors.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they bring that all together.
On that note, they also go on to say, growing up with the original films, Return of the Jedi was the end, but then you're always like, but what happens next? And then with Episode 7 was set many years later, when I was a kid, I would have thought it would have been that much later, but it made sense. It created an opening where you go, wow, so a lot of things that we knew before are probably in there. How do we excavate that? I think that's a really good piece in terms of like what they're really looking at. Jon Favreau also says this: as we are getting deeper and deeper into this, you start to have to really map things out and figure out what that story is, and then have those characters fulfill what their growth cycle is and what their mythic hero's journey is. That's always been George Lucas's base. He's a student of Joseph Campbell. How does it fit into the narrative that has this hero's journey? And so as we have more and more characters line up, you have to figure out how these characters are arcing and if it feels ultimately like a Star Wars story.
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that they're going into the character arcs.
In that interview with George Lucas I was watching, like, it's basically like a love fest on Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey.
I think my last mentor probably was
Joseph Campbell.
Joe Campbell, who asked a lot of the interesting questions and exposed me to a lot of things that made me very interested in a lot more of the cosmic questions and the mystery.
There's a quote from George Lucas that says, "I'm telling a very old story in a new way." That's the idea of like how legends get built. So you have this core message that you retell in different ways throughout the years. And then like bringing it back to the Mando movie, like we're going to see all of these bits and pieces, all the Ahsoka, skeleton crew, like they're really mentioning how all of these things are going to come together and how we're going to see bits and pieces from skeleton crew come into Ahsoka and then Ahsoka come into Mandalorian and the Mandalorian come into all of the other shows as well.
Right.
We're going to see more of that come together as we get closer to what this movie is going to be.
It makes me a little nervous. There is such a weight on this movie already.
Oh yeah,
when we
but
don't
it's a
even,
Star Wars movie. Of
we
course,
don't
there's going
even-
to be weight on it.
We don't even know what these other 3 shows that are coming out. I mean, we have Ahsoka, we have Skeleton Crew.
And we've got Mando season 4.
There's still so much in the air that we don't know.
There's a lot. And I think that's what makes it so exciting is because they have all these different bits and pieces. And I think Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni has said, I think it was Jon Favreau because he said he's already written this 4th season of Mandalorian. There's going to be bits and pieces from Skeleton Crew and Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett. And then I assume in season 4 we're going to see more of those bits and pieces come together.
Right.
And then lead it on to whatever happens in the movie. But I assume there's still going to be maybe another season of Ahsoka or maybe another season of Mandalorian to really get us even closer to that movie. Because that movie is like the end cap
Right.
of what they've all set up.